All right, so our next unit is going to be human impact on the environment, just studying the concepts of ecology by looking at it through a completely human lens. So the first things that we're going to talk about um, would be just the planet as a whole and environmental science. So humans, we depend on the environment for food, water, air, shelter, and many other resources. Um, Food would be growing crops. We get water from the environment. Our houses are built from stuff that we get, of course, from our environment. And then, of course, the air that we breathe is provided by the atmosphere on Earth. All things that we depend on. We are the only species on Earth that has the ability to understand, manipulate, and damage the Earth's ecosystems. So we have the ability to change our environment to fit us. And sometimes what we do ends up hurting the overall environment as a whole. Some things that you might be familiar with are carbon dioxide emissions. And also, whenever we put a parking lot in, we're blocking that area of the ground from getting water, so it actually stops groundwater from being replenished as quickly as it can be. So those are important impacts that we have on our ecosystems. And so basically what environmental science is it's looking at the interaction between humans and their environment and what impacts that we have made just based on things that we have manipulated. So human activities that change the planet have been things like agriculture. And if you think about eastern Montana, we have a lot of agriculture out here, but where agriculture is actually changing the environment the most would be in South America, where rainforests are being taken out to make room for more agriculture. And when you take out a rainforest, you lose a lot of biodiversity. Um, so that particular part of it is having a negative impact on the environment. Industry, that's what we were talking about with carbon emissions. All of those plants and processing industries, cars, auto industry, play a role in altering our environment. Urban development, the same thing. The more roads we lay, the buildings and all of that, the trees that we cut down so that we can make room for all of the buildings, is going to have an impact on our environment. So humans are the most important source of environmental change on the planet because we have changed stuff significantly in the past few years and what the planet looks like today. So human activities change local and global environments. Hunting and gathering are also going to be one of those factors that affect planet Earth. And hunting and gathering, we are affecting the population of the things that we hunt. So when we go out and hunt deer, the reason that we have tags is so that we don't overhunt the population, which is actually a really good thing because we want to continue to be able to hunt deer and get meat that way. So even at the hunting and gathering phase of human existence, we were still changing our environment. So hunting and gathering, early humans obtained food, of course, by hunting and gathering. They hunted mammals and birds and fished the rivers, streams, and oceans. They gathered seeds, fruits, and nuts. They learned which plants were edible and which were not, and I'm sure they learned that by trial and error. Oh, this guy ate that plant and died. Probably shouldn't eat it. But they learned it, they passed it on to the next generation, and they knew that, hey, that plant is deadly. So it was a learning process, but that is what early humanity looked like. So humans arrived in North America about 12,000 years ago. Their arrival was followed by the mass extinction of the woolly mammoth, the giant sloth, and saber-toothed cats. So these are all, I mean, animals you might be familiar with from Ice Age, except said the sloth was tiny and not a giant one. But you guys have all seen pictures of giant sloths from our evolution PowerPoint. Um, and that is because we hunted them. And we didn't really, think about population control and stuff like that. It was like, oh, I'm going to go get food. Woolly mammoth, good source of food. Um, so although it was not extinct worldwide, some species that once lived in North America have disappeared. So these species include cheetahs, zebras, and yaks. They're all things that we wiped out through hunting and gathering. So you can see even early humans, 12,000 years ago, were impacting their environment. Now let's take a closer look, and now we've talked about hunting and gathering, at agriculture. So here, early humans quickly learned how plants grew and ripened. They learned which plants were suitable as foods and which plants had medicinal purposes. So there are plants that actually have some medicinal uses, legitly, and there are others that there's not so much scientific research to support their medicinal purposes. But by the end of the last ice age, which was 11,000 years ago, humans had begun the practice of agriculture. So agriculture is, farming, so purposely growing plants and raising animals um, for resources. So sheep, cows, pigs, horses, all examples of animals that people would raise for agriculture, still do raise for agriculture. The development of agriculture created a steady and stable supply of food. As a result, humans began to settle in communities and towns. So the whole human population before that hunting gathering, that means they were very nomadic. Nomadic means they moved around. So they just followed, wherever the food was. They didn't have towns, communities like we see here. And agriculture is really what started that, was the development of towns and having humans in concentrated populations where they stayed in the same place. Um, which you can see how going from, roaming around the plains to having a permanent town can also change the environment. With the development of tools and machineries, humans began to change the landscapes. We cleared forests for agriculture, we still are, and fertile prairies were converted into farmland. The practice of irrigation allowed dry areas to become farmland, so we changed the environment there. We took, through irrigation, we took what was usually just dry and we put water to it so that we could farm it. So we actually changed what the ecosystem looked like through that practice. And then eventually we started using fertilizers, chemical fertilizers and pesticides to increase our crop yields because, you could lose your crop to some pesticides or parts of your crop to some pesticides. And so in order to do that, we developed something to stop it, which, once again, is going to change the environment around. You're going to have pesticide-resistant bugs and things like that. You're going to actually genetically change what some of the pests look like. So these advances in agriculture brought about major changes in the environment. Pesticides can harm beneficial insects. So not all insects are really bad for plants. And then another problem with pesticides is that you could have them run off into a water source, and then you have contaminated water. And then slowly this pesticide will just accumulate in the environment, and there's something called biomagnification, whereas as you go up the food chain, the effects of the pesticide actually get stronger. So if you guys remember the whole DDT thing, when they were trying to wipe out mosquitoes, what happened is it would make its way up the food chain, and then birds were laying really soft-shelled eggs, and so it really hurt the raptor or birds of prey in Montana even. The peregrine falcon's still recovering from that specifically, as well as, the bald eagle population was affected by DDT as well. All right, let's talk a little bit more about industrial growth and urban development. So the Industrial Revolution, if you guys are in history class, happened around the 1800s. And that added machines and factories. And, of course, machines and factories require a source of energy. And we get energy by fossil fuels, or mostly by fossil fuels nowadays. There's other sources of energy. But we were using coal, oil, natural gas. And all of those things, as they are burned, are going to release pollutants into the environment, and change what things look like. That's why we have heard things called, your carbon footprint, and reducing that because you want to keep the environment healthy. So cities and industries produce large quantities of wastes just because, you have a bunch of people, are going to have a bunch of waste and trash. And so all of that is going to be released into like landfills, or it's going to be released into the air like carbon dioxide emissions. And then soil like landfills, water, there's a huge garbage dump in the ocean. But those are all things that are going to impact what the environment ends up looking like. So when we have waste in our water, that's going to bring a whole new set of microorganisms in. So if we didn't have water treatment plants, we wouldn't have all the access to clean water that we do, and there are still some developing countries that do not. And so when their waste gets carried into the river, they are drinking from that, and that's actually how Giardia? No, that's the wrong disease. Cholera was spread. There's lots of stories in developing countries where people got cholera. They make some poop a lot, and that poop went down their waste removal management system into the river. People would drink the water, they would get cholera. So it's not a good thing to have those systems in place, and that is polluting and changing the environment. Also, pollutants can change the temperature of the water. Fish can only live at a certain temperature. That is going to change their environment, what fish live there, which ones don't. All part of industrial growth and urban development. So the suburban communities have also impacted farmland. So we've actually decreased farmland because we're making these big cities and they just keep getting bigger and bigger. And that leads to some habitat destruction. So a lot of what we do is destroy natural habitats for things that are specialist species, basically. And then if we take that habitat away from them, they can't survive. So that is one of the negative human impacts we have on the environment. So the challenge that we face today is how to maintain a standard of living while controlling the harmful effects of human activity on global ecosystems. And that's where I'm going to leave off. There is some questions that you can answer based on this video. The assignment will be uploaded in Microsoft Teams and due next Monday. And then we will also be talking about renewable and non-renewable resources later.